You may have noticed that Minister Flaherty is now in the building. Thank you, Minister, for coming. We're honored today to have BMO Capital Markets sponsoring this luncheon and these remarks by Minister Flaherty. So I'd like to introduce Lyle McCoy, who's Managing Director, Head of Infrastructure and Public Finance at BMO, and ask him to come up, please, and introduce the Minister.
On behalf of BMO Capital Markets, it's my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker of this session. James M. Flaherty is a third-term Member of Parliament for Whitby-Oshawa here in Ontario. He serves as Canada Minister of Finance and Minister responsible for the Greater Toronto Area. He is a Governor of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. As Minister of Finance, he is also an ex officio member of all the Cabinet committees. The Minister was recently awarded Euromoney Magazine Finance Minister of the Year Award. Euromoney credited him with enhancing Canada's reputation for a sound fiscal policy while taking full account of social justice and overseeing a strong regulatory regime that has kept the financial sector out of chaos. Previously, for more than 10 years, he served as the Member of Provincial Parliament for Whitby-Ajax here in Ontario. He served as Deputy Premier and Minister of Finance, Attorney General, and Minister of Labour. He graduated from Princeton University cum laude and graduated from Osgoode Hall. He was called to the bar in Ontario with honours and practiced law for more than 20 years before being elected to public office. He was married to Christine Elliott, and who serves as a member of the Provincial Parliament for Whitby-Ajax. And the interesting thing here is we're talking about triple P today, but in fact, the Minister has triple Bs. He has triplet sons. So I think that it's close enough in terms of when we get into things. But please join me in welcoming the Honourable Minister.
Maybe I'll just read the introduction again. I liked it. No, I won't do that. It is good to be here. I feel a bit like a ping pong ball today. I was in Toronto this morning and then in Ottawa for a press conference, and I'm back, and I'm going back to Ottawa. So there's snow on the ground in Ottawa if anyone's interested in what's happening weather-wise there. It's an old story. My wife Christine and I do have triplet sons, and they are now 21, 21, and 21. If you, and I'm a Minister of Finance, so I'm interested in efficiency. If any of you are thinking of having children, I encourage multiples. When they're little, you know, you have to. If you have 3 or 4, you can't have them in a carriage that is 3 or 4 wide because it won't fit through the doors of the shopping malls, P3 or not, and. So you have to have them one after the other. As the lawyers here will know the Latin term seriatim, right? And so we did that when they were babies. We didn't get out that much early on, and we live in Whitby. So a big outing for us with the little ones was on a Saturday afternoon at the Oshawa Mall, and we'd go over there and have them in the carriage, the 3 all dressed the same, one behind the other. And more often than not, someone would come up and look at them and say, "Oh, look, 3 twins." Now, I know that couldn't happen in a sophisticated place like Toronto, but it certainly can happen in Oshawa, and it didn't. I feel sort of inadequate. I was watching the awards. I saw the last part of it, and all these great projects and everything that you people in this room are accomplishing, and I admire it. I'm not responsible for creating anything other than I'm just the money guy in our structure in Ottawa. But I'm very pleased to see the progress. I spoke at this conference. It must be 12 years ago, something like that, when I was the Minister of Finance in Ontario. I remember it well, and to see the incredible progress that has been made in the world of public-private partnerships in the past decade plus is really quite quite heartening to me, especially as someone responsible for capital expenditures in the largest government in this country. Because the reality is all of us in government know that we are not going to have the kind of capital resources in the medium term, certainly, that we may have had at one time, nor are we going to deficit finance at the federal government level, at least. So we have to be innovative. We have to make use of public-private partnerships, because we all know that the infrastructure demands across Canada are very substantial and are fundamental for our government's agenda. That is the creation of jobs and growth and long-term prosperity for the country. Bonjour, c'est un grand plaisir pour moi d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. I know Governor Snyder spoke a while ago. I spent some time with him yesterday. I'm very, very pleased with the result, of course, of the referendum about the crossing at Detroit-Windsor, the referendum that was held in Michigan. That's a terrific result, and we look forward to moving forward in cooperation with the state of Michigan and the American authorities on that project. I want to recognize the significant contribution of the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships over the past 20 years in promoting P3s. Your vision, and I'm quoting, to influence the way in which public services are financed and delivered in Canada, unquote, has undeniably helped to usher in what is really a new era of cooperative effectiveness that's getting things built right across the country and doing so in a way that makes best value of taxpayers' dollars. I'd also like to congratulate you for choosing such a timely and appropriate theme for this conference in the Power in Partnership. We all understand that we work better when we work together toward the same goal. Canada, of course, is a federation. We have the federal government. We also have 10 provincial governments and 3 territorial governments. And we have, of course, many municipalities, and some of our cities are growing into substantial government. So we need to work together. I'm happy to say we do. I remember very well late 2008 and early 2009 in this country when it became apparent, particularly in December 2008, that we had gone into recession, and the Western world had gone into recession, what the economists now call the Great Recession, the worst recession since the 30s. And the discussions I had with my provincial colleagues at the time about stimulus and what we could do to make sure 2 things. One, that we did not have double-digit unemployment in this country, millions of people out of work. And secondly, that we moderated the depth of the recession and hopefully the length of the recession. The G20 leaders met for the first time in Washington in November 2008. It was at that meeting that they agreed that we would together in the G20 seek to stimulate our economies by 4% of GDP. Well, we were successful in doing that in Canada because of the cooperation of the provinces with the Government of Canada, 2% at the federal level, another 2% at the provincial level. And a lot of infrastructure got built because of that. Our unemployment rate never went into double digits. Our unemployment rate remains significantly below that in the United States, particularly when you compare apples with apples in terms of how we calculate employment and unemployment numbers. And that's the first time that has happened since the 1970s as between Canada and the United States. So no single level of government can address the country's infrastructure needs on its own. We do need to meet and work together on this. The finance ministers of the provinces and territories will be meeting together with me at Meech Lake later in the month of December, as we do each year. We do need to make sure that we work in partnership to modernize the nation's infrastructure. The reality is over 90% of the public infrastructure in Canada is owned at the provincial, territorial, and municipal levels. So today I want to talk about 3 things. One, some comments about the significant value that P3s generate. Secondly, what our government is doing to move the P3 agenda forward. And finally, some of the key successes we have achieved so far working together. Just before I do that, I want to talk about the economy for a moment, because all of this discussion is premised, of course, on the economic performance of our country and, quite frankly, the economic performance of the industrialized countries. As I said 2 weeks ago in our economic and fiscal update, we have had a resilient economy in Canada relative to the rest of the industrialized world. Compared with most advanced economies in the world, we are in a relatively good position. Since our government introduced the stimulus phase of Canada's Economic Action Plan to respond to the global recession, we have more than recovered all of our economic output and all of the jobs lost during the recession. In fact, Canada has the best job creation record in the industrialized world since the recession. In Canada, the private sector has been the primary driver of new job creation. Over 90% of the jobs in full-time positions in the private sector, more than 2/3 in high-wage industries. So our economic fundamentals in this country remain sound, but the risks to the global economy remain serious. As I highlighted in the update 2 weeks ago, global weakness has resulted in lower projected government revenues because of spending reductions and controls. We do remain as a government on track to balance our budget in the medium term, and that is our goal, certainly, which we will accomplish. The two most worrisome risks you're well aware of, the so-called fiscal cliff in the United States at the beginning of January and the continuing crisis in Europe. We're not immune to those global developments. In fact, we've been living through the European situation now for 4 or 5 years. This is not new, and it's not yet resolved, and is a source of some frustration. Of course, the American situation is capable of resolution. We just encourage our friends in Washington to move forward as expeditiously as possible on that. Our government does remain committed to keeping Canada strong and prosperous by creating the right conditions to enable Canadians and Canadian businesses to feel confident to invest, to create jobs, and to grow our economy. So in this environment, our government remains focused on what we can control. We can't control what happens in Europe or the United States. We can control our discretionary spending, our program spending in the Government of Canada, and we are doing that. We are not going to reduce our transfers to the provinces, which another government did in the 1990s, which was very detrimental to schools and hospitals in this province, which I knew well because I was in the government then. We're not going to do that. And we're not going to reduce transfers to individuals, to seniors, to persons with disabilities in Canada. But we are going to continue to watch carefully about 1/3 of our budget, which is the program spending of the government. We are committed to returning to balanced budgets in the medium term. We are committed to controlling the growth in government spending by implementing the savings that we announced in the budget this year. And we are committed to implementing the commitments made in the budget this year to encourage jobs and economic growth, which are measures like the tax credit for small business, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is. There are 534,000 businesses who would be entitled to use that tax credit if they chose to hire one person, which would help us have an even better unemployment rate. The goal of all of this, whether one is in Europe or trying to solve some of the problems with the southern European countries or here, is to strike a balance, of course. It's to strike that balance between controlling spending and making sure there's economic growth, because you can't impose an austerity program such that that an economy goes into recession and expect that economy to produce jobs. So that's the balance we're seeking to strike here in Canada. Our real GDP growth is about 2%, and we have some weakness in nominal GDP growth, and we anticipate, and the economists anticipate, that we'll be able to maintain that level going forward. It was Grey Cup this weekend. As you know, here in Toronto, and one of my new friends from Western Canada said, you know, you're not doing a bad job as finance minister. He didn't use the word balance. He said, keep steering between the ditches. And I thought that was a helpful description of what we try to do at the Department of Finance. Let me talk about P3s. the significant value that they offer in terms of lasting infrastructure in Canada. The contribution to economic growth is very important. I know that your council believes that public-private partnerships can play a key role to address the infrastructure needs that currently exist in Canada, and I heartily agree. During the global economic recession, our government did respond with a massive stimulus program. You know, we went from running a balanced budget in 60 days to running a $58 billion deficit. Now we've reduced it by half. We're down below half of that now, and we'll balance it within the next couple of years. But it was a dramatic thing to do, and it was only possible because we did it in partnership with other levels of government. We sometimes hold different viewpoints from our provincial colleagues, but I think we all agree on the importance of infrastructure as something we have in common. Since 2006, the Government of Canada has significantly increased its direct support for provincial, territorial, and municipal infrastructure. We have done this as a result of two key initiatives: the 7-year infrastructure plan, which was launched in 2007, that's Building Canada, and the infrastructure measures found in the 2009 stimulus budget that year. These include the $8.8 billion under the Building Canada Fund, and I need to mention there's about $5 billion of that will continue to flow this year and over future years to municipalities, provinces, and territories to reflect project timelines. Secondly, the predictable and long-term funding for municipalities under the gas tax fund and the goods and services tax rebate for municipalities. The government has made the $2 billion annual allocation under the gas tax fund a permanent legislative measure. And every time I meet with mayors, as I did last week in Ottawa, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, I encourage them to leverage that money. They have a guaranteed gas tax fund flowing to them from the best credit risk in the country, that's the Government of Canada, and I'd like them to make use of it and maximize that resource over the long term. Thirdly, investments to strengthen trade-related infrastructure through the Gateways and Border Crossings Fund and the Asia-Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative. Overall, there are about 30,000 infrastructure projects that have been completed with support from the Economic Action Plan since January 2009. And very importantly, this money, a lot of the money got out the door quickly, creating tens of thousands of jobs in communities across Canada at a time when it really mattered, and we needed those jobs desperately. So our government's infrastructure plan is comprehensive. It brings our partners on board, all of our partners, including, of course, the private sector. Governments throughout the world have been increasingly turning toward P3s to deliver much-needed public infrastructure. We do need creativity and vision when it comes to financing, delivering, and maintaining infrastructure. In our view, P3s can and should be used when they make sense, which is when they provide better value for taxpayers' money than traditional procurement can. And you notice I'm not saying cheaper or less expensive. I'm saying better value for taxpayers' money. And as you all know, there are lots of factors that go into that consideration. We believe in sharing risks with the private sector, such as design, construction, operating, and maintenance, as opposed to the traditional approach of governments taking on all project risks. By using public-private partnerships, more infrastructure can be created more quickly, economic infrastructure that creates jobs and growth. I want to talk for a moment then about what our government is doing to support P3s. I should give you a little bit of history on that. When we were elected in 2006, there was not a federal P3 agency. There is now, as you know, P3 Canada Inc., which has been growing and doing a good job and doing more and more creative work at the federal level in cooperation with others. P3 Canada Inc. does not report to the Parliament through the Infrastructure Department. It reports through the Minister of Finance, through the Finance Department, intentionally, because our conception, our idea, our concept of what it is primarily an enabling, a facilitating source of activity in public-private partnerships and a source of expertise and a screen. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Encouraging P3 opportunities is not an ideological project for our government. It is a logical project from our point of view. It should appeal across ideological lines. When I was the minister responsible in Ontario for Superbill some years ago, I had the opportunity to travel to the UK to look into their experience with P3s. I met with Prime Minister Blair's Chief of Staff and his P3 expert, and they told me that the Labour government of Prime Minister Blair was pursuing P3s as a matter of policy, even though the concept had been introduced by the previous Conservative government. At that point, the Labour government of Prime Minister Blair had over 200 public-private partnership projects underway or in planning. And I remember sort of delightfully as a Conservative when his Chief of Staff turned to me and he said, we're continuing with the creation of public-private partnerships. He said, it is a Conservative idea, but it works. So I encourage all governments to avoid any sort of ideological approach to the idea of P3s. I had the opportunity on that trip also, and this matters to people in public office, to go an hour north of London and see a brand new hospital that had just been opened on time, on budget, with the unions happy, the patients happy, a beautiful location. It's called Darrant Valley Hospital, about an hour outside of London. That encouraged us in Ontario to go ahead with the Royal Ottawa Hospital, which we announced in 2001. And as I recall, it was opened in 2006 or so. A fabulous teaching hospital, the first teaching hospital, I'm told, done as a P3 in Canada. Well loved by the physicians, well loved by the nurses, the technologists, and the true test above all, well loved by the patients. So that's a successful P3 in Ottawa. If you get a chance to visit, I encourage you to have a look at that. We did create P3 Canada Inc. The purposes of it, and this was in the documents creating it, was first of all to act as a centre of expertise for the Government of Canada on P3s. Secondly, to facilitate the creation of P3s in Canada. And thirdly, a fund was provided to assist P3 Canada in those circumstances where it was necessary for government to make some investment to make the public-private partnership work. It became operational in 2009, led, as you know, by John McBride and its board of directors, drawn from the private sector. The corporation is already making a difference. It works with provincial and territorial governments, municipalities, of course, First Nations, to promote the increased adoption of P3s in infrastructure procurement. P3 Canada has created a suite of tools and products aimed at sharing their knowledge with other organizations considering the P3 option. In Budget 2011, our government went further, instituting a requirement that federal departments evaluate the potential for using a P3 to deliver large federal capital projects, and that is the P3 screen I mentioned a moment ago. As a result, all federal infrastructure projects creating an asset with a lifespan of at least 20 years and having capital costs of $100 million or more must be assessed to determine whether a P3 may be a suitable procurement option. Should the assessment conclude that there is P3 potential, the procuring department is required to develop a P3 proposal among possible procurement options. Departments are also encouraged to explore the potential of P3 approaches for other types of projects and procurements of services. All of these initiatives will mean getting the P3 approach considered more often for more projects across the country. Now, some highlights of the success of P3s as I discern them. I am someone who's a strong proponent and advocate for P3s because I've seen what can be accomplished. I was heartened to see some of what had been accomplished today during the awards ceremony. P3 Canada has been acting as an advisor during the past year alone to Transport Canada on both the new bridge over the St. Lawrence River in Montreal and the Detroit River International Crossing at Windsor, which are two of the largest potential P3 projects under consideration in Canada. Of course, it was reassuring to hear of the recent defeat of Proposition 6 in Michigan. I thank the governor for his hard work on that yesterday, and also our Consul General in New York, Ray Norton. I don't know if Ray is here, but as many of you know, Ray did yeoman's work, going town to town in the state of Michigan and town hall to town hall, encouraging the citizens of Michigan to vote to defeat the idea of not building the span. The new span is very, very important. I've been working on this since 1995 as an elected person, first of all in Ontario and then federally. I can't believe that we're getting realistically close to be able to accomplish the new span at Windsor, Detroit. It will attract new investments and business opportunities to boost both local and national economies, and will create much-needed jobs for both the Michigan and Ontario communities. The crossing will also increase border capacity to handle future trade and travel growth, and will be built with the security of both of our countries in mind. Of course, it's very important for the auto sector, which is very important to the province of Ontario, particularly employment in southwestern Ontario. So with the cooperation of the Michigan government and the help of P3 Canada, we will get this important project built. P3 Canada has also successfully launched 4 annual rounds calling for applications to the P3 Canada Fund from provinces, territories, municipalities, and First Nations. Their outreach and awareness strategy, combined with their expert advice, has resulted in the announcement of several P3 projects across Canada, totaling close to $1.7 billion in eligible construction costs alone. And there are some interesting projects because this is a big country. The Iqaluit International Airport Improvement Project in Nunavut, which will improve existing infrastructure and build a new airport terminal building in Iqaluit. There's a new train maintenance facility in Lachine, Quebec, a new train maintenance facility in Whitby, Ontario. Of course, these are both in aid of public transit in large cities like Montreal and Toronto. The construction of the North Saskatchewan River crossing in Alberta to alleviate traffic congestion, and the construction of a new organics biofuel facility for the city of Surrey, British Columbia. And a very innovative project having to do with housing for persons who need housing and who have social difficulties with addiction, living on the street, and homelessness and so on. And that is the Downtown East Side Housing Renewal Project in Vancouver, which is a P3 project through P3 Canada Inc. in cooperation with private partners. And this is a project which I'm going to watch closely because I wish it every success, because it is a serious social need in most of our big cities across Canada. So while still new for some Canadian provinces, territories, and municipalities, Canada can and should celebrate this success, including at events like this one. As a member of the Ontario government more than a decade ago, I was a strong advocate of tapping into pools of capital that exist in the private sector, and I remain so today. I have mentioned the Royal Ottawa Hospital. I was very proud of that. I was very proud to see more hospitals happening in the province of Ontario over time and across the country. And I know that a lot of the provincial infrastructure agencies have been in the forefront of all of that work. We also now, in the area of trade, have the federal departments and agencies such as the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, Export Development Canada, the Canadian Commercial Corporation, along with P3 Canada, the Canadian Council, of course, for Public-Private Partnerships, and many of you here today from the private sector, sharing knowledge and experience and helping to transform the global P3 market in the process. So in our view, federally, the P3 approach is an essential part of our government's future plans. The reality is that governments are cash short. The good news is that the balance sheets of corporations in Canada are very strong and are awash in cash. We have been working with provinces, territories, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and other stakeholders on the development of a long-term plan for public infrastructure that extends beyond the expiry of the Building Canada Plan in 2014. As we've noted previously, we are working on a new plan that will focus on investments in infrastructure that support long-term economic growth and prosperity, while encouraging greater private sector involvement and increasing the use of P3s. A new plan will be designed to leverage funds from all levels of government and the private sector and ensure affordability and sustainability over the long term. In their consultations on the new plan, my colleagues, Ministers LaBelle and Fletcher, have been traveling the country consulting with municipalities, provinces, territories, and other stakeholders on the future of the Government of Canada's role in infrastructure. While there are various perspectives and opinions across the country, we have heard strong support for the greater use of the private sector in infrastructure. I'm not here, of course, to reveal the contents of the new plan today. It is a work in progress. But I will say that at a time where governments at all levels are increasingly pressed for funds, creativity and innovation are required to maximize value for taxpayers. It is incumbent on us as governments to evaluate the old delivery methods for their effectiveness. We need to ensure people and communities have the tools they require to prosper. P3s have been effectively used to deliver projects in Canada through both federal and provincial government entities, as you know. And at the federal level, we intend to do more P3s. Now, I've gone on almost as long as it seems. Let me conclude. We know that P3s can allow more projects to be built on a more timely basis across Canada with added value to taxpayers. Quite simply, we need P3s, and we can't afford to overlook their potential as we deal with persistent global uncertainty. I expect P3s will continue to play an increasingly significant role in infrastructure investment, helping to connect and strengthen this great country and to accelerate economic growth and jobs. Infrastructure is key to our success as a nation, our success as an economy capable of producing jobs, growth, and long-term prosperity. This conference takes place during a challenging time globally, yet one full of opportunities for those with new ideas and innovative thinking, which is the very foundation of P3s. We believe that the ingenuity and creativity of individual Canadians, such as the people in this room, will create lasting economic growth and jobs through investment and innovation. In working toward a better Canada, infrastructure will play a key role in connecting Canadians to the world and to each other. And I look forward to working with innovators like you to help make this happen. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. You can hang out here for a while. It's always great to hear the Minister speak on the subject of infrastructure and P3s in particular. And in fact, with the kinds of messages, Minister, you delivered today, you can go on as long as you'd like. Not a problem. We all know that in order to really advance the yardsticks on the P3 front in Canada, we need strong political leadership. And it's clearly evident that that's the case with Minister Flaherty. There has been so much accomplished over the last couple of years aimed at advancing the yardsticks, encouraging greater uptake of P3s across Canada, but most importantly, working hard to change the culture around innovative approaches to infrastructure development and helping those that are keen to do it but need to get just a bit better informed on how to move those yardsticks. And I think, Minister, through your commitment and through an organization like P3 Canada, which is for us a very strong partner in moving forward, I congratulate you and I thank you for that contribution and again for spending time with us today. It really sets up the next day of our discussions around how do we move now to the next step, both here at home and internationally. So thank you very much for your time. And on behalf of the Council and all the participants at today's event, we have made a small contribution to the Habitat for Humanity to recognize your participation with us at our conference today. So thank you again for that.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.